UFC 311 schedule, fight card, odds, start times and viewing details for Makhachev vs Tsarukyan 2. Plan ahead for your UFC fight nights with the upcoming event schedule. Below, we have listed all of UFC's major upcoming fight night cards and pay-per-view events, including announced bouts and odds from BetMGM. Be sure to check back frequently as new fights are added. Here are the major upcoming UFC events. UFC 311, Islam Makhachev vs Arman Tsarukyan 2. Date Saturday, January 18, 2025. Location Intuit Dome, Inglewood, California. Main card start time, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN plus PPV. Lightweight Championship, Islam Makhachev vs Arman Tsarukyan. Bantamweight Championship, Merab Dvalishvili vs Umar Nurmagomedov. Light Heavyweight Yuri Prochaska vs Jamal Hill. Lightweight, Beneil Dariush vs Renato Moicano. Middleweight, Kevin Holland vs Rainier de Ritter. Prelim start time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Disney Plus News/ESPN Plus. Light Heavyweight, Johnny Walker vs Bogdan Guskov. Bantamweight, Peyton Talbot vs Raoni Barcelos. Heavyweight, Jailton Almeida vs Sergey Spivak. Middleweight, Zachary Reese vs Cedric Dumas. Early prelims start time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Disney/ESPN Plus. Lightweight, Grant Dawson vs Diego Ferreira. Women's Bantamweight, Carol Rosa vs Eileen Perez. Bantamweight, Rinya Nakamura vs Miwan Gafurov. Bantamweight, Ricky Tercios vs Bernardo Sopaj. Flyweight, Tager Ulanbekov vs Clayton Carpenter. UFC Saudi Arabia, Israel Adesanya vs Nasser Dinimov. Date Saturday, February 1, 2025. Location of the venue, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Main card start time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN Plus. Middleweight, Israel Adesanya vs Nasser Dinimov. Middleweight, Shara Magomedov vs Michael Page. Women's Flyweight, Jasmine Jasadovicius vs Mayra Bueno Silva. Lightweight, Terence McKinney vs Damir Hadzovic. Heavyweight, Sergey Pavlovich vs Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Prelim start time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN. Said Nurmagomedov vs Vinicius Oliveira. Featherweight, Mohamed Naimov vs Khan Ofli. Featherweight, Bogdan Grad vs Lucas Alexander. Heavyweight, Hamdi Abdelwahab vs Jamal Pogas. Heavyweight, Shamil Ghazi vs Thomas Peterson. Lightweight, Jordan Levitt vs Abdul Karim Al Selwati. Middleweight, Vikram Aliskarov vs Andre Muniz. Lightweight, Fairs Ziem vs Mike Davis. UFC 312, Dricus Du Plessis vs Sean Strickland. Date Saturday, February 8, 2025. Location, Kudos Bank Arena, Sydney, Australia. Main card start time, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN Plus PPV. Middleweight Championship, Dricus Du Plessis vs Sean Strickland. Women's Strawweight Championship, Zhang Weili vs Tatiana Suarez. Light Heavyweight, Jimmy Crute vs Rodolfo Bellato. Prelim start time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Disney Plus ESPN 2/ESPN Plus. Lightweight, Quillan Sokol vs Anshul Jubli. Heavyweight, Justin Tafa vs Taliesin Teixeira. Welterweight, Jonathan McAuliffe vs Kevin Jussett. Early prelims, start time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Disney Plus/ESPN Plus. Flyweight, Rait Saruya vs Stuart Nickel. Lightweight, Tom Nolan vs Vyacheslav Borshchev. Featherweight, Jack Jenkins vs Gabriel Santos. Women's Flyweight, *** Wang Tsong vs Bruna Brazil. UFC Vegas, Jared Cannonier vs Gregory Rodriguez. Date Saturday, February 15, 2025. Location, UFC Apex, Las Vegas. Main card, start time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN Plus. Middleweight, Jared Cannonier vs Gregory Rodriguez. Middleweight, Rodolfo Vieira vs Andrei Petrosky. Lightweight, Jared Gordon vs Kyle Fernandez. Prelim start time, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN Plus. Heavyweight, Dante Almeida vs Walter Walker. Flyweight, Rafael Estevam vs Jesus Santos Aguilar. Women's Bantamweight, ** Julia Avila vs Jacqueline Cavalcanti. UFC Seattle, Henry Cejudo vs Song Yadong. Date Saturday, February 22, 2025. Location, Climate Pledge Arena, Seattle. Main card start time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN Plus. Bantamweight, Henry Cejudo vs Song Yadong. Bantamweight, Rob Font vs Dominic Cruz. Heavyweight, Curtis Blades vs Rizvan Kuniev. Featherweight, Edson Barboza vs Steve Garcia. Featherweight, Gene Silva vs Melsik Bagdasaryan. Middleweight, Brendan Allen vs Anthony Hernandez. Prelims start time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN Plus. Welterweight, Adam Fugit vs Islam Dulatov. Light Heavyweight, Ion Kutalaba vs Ibo Aslan. Women's bantamweight *** Ketlin Vieira vs Macy Chiasson. Middleweight Antonio Trocoli vs Mansour Abdul Malik. Light heavyweight Modestas Bukauskas vs Rafael Cerqueira. UFC Vegas, Brandon Royval vs Makhachev. Date Saturday, March 1, 2025. Location UFC Apex, Las Vegas. Main card start time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN+. Flyweight Brandon Royval vs Makhachev. Lightweight, Nasrat Hakparast vs Esteban Rybovics. Flyweight Charles Johnson vs Ramazan Temirov. Flyweight ASU Almabayev vs Steve Erceg. UFC 313 TBA. Date Saturday, March 8, 2025. Location T-Mobile Arena, Las Vegas. UFC Vegas, TBA. Date Saturday, March 15, 2025. Location UFC Apex, Las Vegas. UFC London, TBA. Date Saturday, March 22, 2025. Location O2 Arena, London. Main card start time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN+. Light heavyweight Jan Blachowicz vs Carlos Ulberg. Middleweight Christian Leroy Duncan vs Andrei Pulev. Women's flyweight Molly McCann vs Istela Nunes. Heavyweight Marcin Tibura vs Mick Parkin. Light heavyweight Alonzo Menafield vs Umar Sy. Women's strawweight Shauna Bannon vs Pooja Tomar.